Julie Ripley, welcome to the Journey On podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. Um, you are one, some of the guests I have on here I know quite a bit about and things like that, but I don't know very much at all, almost if anything, about you. So this is going to be fun. So why don't you tell me what you currently do, and then we'll kind of unravel how you got there.
All right. Currently, I'm a life coach. And how I got here is I burned out as a CFO at 35. And I had this moment in my life where I looked myself in the mirror and said, "You're never going to get here again. And you're going to figure out why you got yourself to the point of burnout at 35."
You're just going to jump right in here, aren't you? I had
Yeah.
read that bit on your website. I'm like, I'm going to bring that up at some point in time, and you can tell me about the burnout and stuff. Let's just not jump so far back. Um, so tell me about the life coach. What do you do? What sort of people do you work with?
Well, I work with a lot of people who are on the verge of burnout. I work with a lot of people who are transitioning, maybe in a career, maybe moving from like retirement or from career to retirement. And really, I work with a lot of people teaching them how to back off on the pushiness of what they do. And a lot of my messaging is all around self connection and having a relationship with yourself because
Yeah,
the
that
relate.
was sorry, that was one of the things that attracted me to like your
Yeah.
bio and stuff. Like you said, you're all about connection. So that's
Mhm.
I'm really interested in that subject.
Well, I think one of the reasons, well, I believe the relationship with ourself is the most important relationship we have because it's the foundation of every other relationship we have. And just because we have a relationship with ourself doesn't mean we have to choose not to have a relationship with somebody else, but we can be more powerful in how we show up and participate in our relationships because we know and understand ourselves. We know what we bring to this table. We know how to stay in our own lane. We know how to protect what's important to us.
Yeah, that whole relationship with yourself thing. It's so interesting because at least for me, for the longest time, I was only being who I thought they thought I was supposed to be, W-
Hmm.
and 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 had no idea at all that that was going on. And I imagine that's probably quite true for a lot of people. Like, who are we under all that conditioned
Hmm.
that all that conditioned stuff?
Yeah.
You were saying a minute ago that you work with a lot of people who um, have to learn not to push so much. Is that what you said? Something like,
Hmm.
yeah. And so I imagine these people are usually quite successful at what they do.
Yeah. They're go getters. I often kindly remind them they're overachievers. I was one of them. But I heard recently this quote, and it really speaks to what I do. It's our natural participation from who we are should be enough for success. Where I see, I want to be careful how I say this. A lot of success is driven by overachieving or overcompensating for who we don't think we are. And it doesn't mean we can't go out and achieve. I'm not anti achievement or anti accomplishment, but accomplishments are so much better, so much sweeter when they're from the truth of who we are instead of who we think we need to be.
Yeah. Would you say that a lot of high achieving people's you said they're go getters sort of thing. It's some sort of a trauma response to stuff that I don't know. Have you ever listened to my podcast?
I have quite a bit,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Oh, have you? So I've talked about this with some of the guests on here. One was a trauma therapist from Canada, but she was talking about coping privilege. You ever heard the term coping privilege?
I haven't. I don't think I heard that podcast.
So she refers to coping privilege as you could have two brothers who have the same trauma as a child. And, the more I get into the whole trauma thing, you think it's about, oh, if you were beaten or something like that. But a lot of times that's got nothing to do with anything. A lot of times it's
Hmm.
something as simple as having your feelings invalidated, or
Right. I love
and
Gabor's definition,
oh yeah.
Gabor Mate. Trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you.
I
So
took a
it,
screenshot of one of his quotes last night. Children don't get traumatized because they get hurt. They get traumatized because they're alone with the hurt.
yes. Yeah.
Anyway, so on the podcast with the trauma therapist, she was talking about, let's say you have two brothers and they experience the same trauma. One of them might resort to drugs, but one of them might resort to achieving, and one ends up being a CEO, and the other one ends up being a drug addict or possibly in jail.
Hmm.
And society looks on the CEO as the good guy, and the other guy is the bad guy. Whereas the reason they are both where they are is that was their form of coping. But this coping privilege is one guy's, the way he's wired, the way and it's not a choice. You don't go, well, I could work really hard and create a business, or I could tie off my arm and shoot up with heroin. It's not that sort of
Right.
a choice. It's just however you're wired to deal with things that happen to you. And one ends up being CEO and one ends up being in jail or something or other. But they both have the same thing that
Yes.
led them there. It's a coping privilege. Have you ever read The Masks of Masculinity by Lewis Howes?
No, I have heard about that book from your podcast, and so it's on my list.
It because it's along a very similar line, like all these different masks that, and I don't think it's just the masks of masculinity, because I think women have masks too, but that whole mask of masculinity is about the masks that men put on to hide their emotions. And so, women are not culturally not supposed to show their emotions. So they probably have less masks, I imagine. But I think their masks might come from other things.
Yes, I was going to
Diff,
say
diff,
I would say they have masks from different reasons.
oh yes, yeah,
Yeah.
not the same reasons as the men. The men's is the things they do to hide their emotions.
Hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, so it sounds like it's a very similar thing, as far as like these people that you are helping. You've got, they're go getters, but um, they're almost go getters for the wrong reason. And actually,
Yeah.
the trauma therapist from Canada I had on the podcast, she was talking, because I asked her, I said, "Did you have therapy?" I think it was her. I asked, "Did you have a lot of therapy before you became a therapist?" Did because I've talked to a number of therapists who had quite a bit of therapy and thought, I want to share this with other people. This is
Hmm.
mind boggling stuff. And she said one of her mentors, and I think she said she did, but one of her mentors said to her, you can't stay in the business for the same reason you got in the business. And I
So true.
imagine it's kind of the same for these people.
Hmm.
They they can't stay at the CEO level, or whatever they're, in the C suite, or whatever they're doing, for the same reason they got in there. They've got to understand why they got there, and work through that trauma.
Hmm. Well, when they start to up against their limitations, and
Mm,
and it starts to show up and express as teams falling apart, growing a business and having record turnover. Because when a CEO can't say no to customers or growing the business, and they grow faster than their team, they create a toxic work environment. But they don't realize it because we're always looking at growth as a company. The bottom line, are you, the mindset is you're either growing or dying. And that is so not true. Nothing in nature grows all the time. Nothing in nature flowers all the time. So we have these really disconnected measurements of success. And then we try and force people into that. And what they do is they get pulled further and further away from who they really are, how they really want to participate. And and their accomplishments become empty. I worked at a guest ranch that I was visiting with a woman, and she said to me, her husband's a billionaire, by the way. She says, "You know how I know my husband isn't feeling good about himself?" So I leaned in and I said, "Ooh, do tell me." Like I felt like she was pulling back the veil for a little bit. And what she said is, he grows his business.
Mm.
So when we look at that, and right, the mind wants to justify and defend and explain all the reasons for that and why it's okay. But when we step back and look at that, what is really driving the definition of success is this feeling of not feeling good about ourselves. And that's an overcompensation.
Yeah.
So when we start to look at patterns of overcompensation, of perfection, of over delivering, they're really not even meeting the needs of the people involved, whether that's an employee, a manager, somebody in the C-suite, or even the customers, because they're not connected to what is important or what is needed. And it's based on not having a relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because that's everything I've read has come to that. I love the fact you mentioned Gabor Mate before because I love
Mm-hmm.
his work. I think it's
Yeah.
very,
He
very
has been a
important.
huge contribution to the world.
Yeah. So a minute ago, you said you're working at a guest ranch. So tell me about the path to becoming a life coach. You're in Montana now, and you grew up in Montana. So you grew
Yes.
up in an absolutely beautiful place.
Yes. Yes. I try not to tell people that because we have a lot of wide open space and it's being eaten up with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
so
I just did
so
a clinic in Montana recently, and you know, so I flew into Missoula, and there was a lot of. It was almost like Austin, Texas, because Austin, Texas, a lot of
Mhm.
people from California you know, have moved to Austin, Texas to get out of California, and
Yeah.
there's all the bumper stickers like "Go back to California." So I got that. I got that vibe in Montana too. Like I just showed you some stickers we bought. We went in this one crazy store, and my son was with me. We went in this one crazy store in Missoula, and it's the most eclectic store I've ever seen. It's
Mhm.
got a bit of everything in it, and it had all these stickers, but a lot of the stickers said something like, piss off back to California or whatever, like you've seen it now, get
Right.
lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I love Montana is the wide open space. Right, and this connection to nature and to really see how life is sustained with or without the human being. Right? Like it exists and we don't have to mess it up. And so anyway, I don't want to get off on that tangent. So I
Oh,
grew
I'd
up
love to
in
get off on
Montana.
that. I'd love to get off on that tangent because that's the stuff. I mean, you said before about businesses, you said nothing in nature continues to grow. There's seasons,
Mhm.
and I think that's the the crux of it all. That's the wisdom. A lot of times, helping people with their horses, people
Mhm.
have to change some things about themselves, which usually helps everybody else in their family as well. But it's the same thing. You can't force nature, and
Right.
I think the great thing about working with horses is they are nature, and you have to
Yes.
learn to blend in with nature. You can't. There's a great saying, and I tried to remember it here on the podcast a little while ago, but something like you can't. Oh, I forget what it is. It's got something to do with you. You cannot. Basically, you can't. This is a really bad version of it, but you can't force a tree to grow.
Mhm.
The saying actually is you can plan for this, but you can't plan for, or you can rush this, but you can't rush. And the thing you can't rush had something to do with had something to do with nature, but it's, I'm really into like shamanism these days and indigenous wisdom and all that sort of stuff. And it just keeps circling back
Right.
to, like, did you ever watch a Netflix show called One Strange Rock with
Mm-mm.
Chris?
No.
The
I do
who
want
was
to
the
circle you back to this nature thing
yeah.
because this shows the disconnection. We are nature. Human beings are part of nature. And in order to, like, we have separated ourselves from nature, and we wonder why we have high levels of mental illness,
Hmm.
why, the world is kind of coming apart on some levels, but in ways I see a lot of positive things happening in that because the structures we have built this on, our country on, aren't going to work for the next 100 years. And so we have to return to nature. We have to remember we are nature as human beings. So if we want to be powerful in what we create, we have to understand our nature, the nature of things. And if we studied the nature of things and built patterns of success off what exists in nature, I think we would be a lot more happy. I think we would have a lot more peace. I think we would get along with other people better. But when we get stuck in this competition of even the way we're taught about nature in school, like one of the things I was taught is survival of the fittest. You have to be tougher than the other person to survive. And in my work, I kind of flip that on its head because working with horses, if you've got a horse herd, you could say they're in a herd for protection, but I really think that there's something else going on there. They're in a herd for belonging. Because when I'm in a herd and you're concerned about what I'm concerned about, and you're curious about what I'm curious about, I feel like I belong, and my nervous system can back off and feel safe. And then I can relate to you on a completely different level. But what we have done is, I call it the disease of dismissal. We have dismissed anything that is any kind of internal signal, like understanding our emotions, recognizing where our thoughts come from, feeling the sensation of fear. We just say, oh, don't do that. Just take this action and it all goes away. And that's not how it works. We have to understand the nature of things. And there is nothing in our society that helps us develop an understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, it almost does the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the wider the gap from our who we are, like our true nature, and what we express in the world creates stress, anxiety, depression. But right, and sort of the journey back to ourselves isn't the easiest, most smooth thing I've ever done or have led people through, but it's worth it.
Yeah, but it's I love the way you put it, the journey back to ourselves. And so, you know, if it's that hard a journey, that tells you how far we've come from ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, powerful stuff. Okay, let's back up. We're going to back up to you. You were a minute ago. You were born in Montana, and then
I
we
was
kind of
born in Montana. Yeah.
Montana's beautiful. Then we get on the nature, and then we get on that. Um, and so you've always lived it.
Mhm. Yeah. All
Yeah,
at different places in the state. Yes.
yeah. So did you grow up in town? Did you grow up on a ranch?
Uh, on a small horse ranch outside of Billings, and my dad had a string of mules, so I started going to the mountains at 9 years old, and rode double behind my brother for 3 days on our first pack trip, and and then have
Oh, so
since just
you guys would pack into the mountains.
right. Yep, we'd
Oh
go
my
in for three,
goodness!
4, 5 days. Yeah,
Talk
and
about
then
connecting with nature.
yeah. And then my dad took in a lot of outside horses. So I was exposed to a lot of different horse types and what they were doing. And one thing I really respect about my dad is he always took lessons. He was always going to clinics, always trying to learn. Um, and and so that just kind of became like how I approach life. And that's hence my purpose might change. Because if I learn and grow and develop, what kind of connection, what can I get my horse to do? So I say if I was an artist, the horse was my medium. And what kind of connection could I create? And I dabbled in barrel racing. I've roped a little bit, did a lot of ranch work, sorting pairs, some brandings and chipping and things like that. And then I've also ridden English and done some jumping and some dressage, and so I was able to bring all of those techniques into something I created myself to build a connection. And when I was running barrels, I had this amazing horse that, not that he was amazing and that he was winning it all, but he really was honest and he gave me everything he had. And I noticed like he didn't like the boots I put on him. And one day I was like, this horse will sort cows, he'll jump jumps, he'll run barrels. I would ride 100 miles on him by myself, no questions asked. Like that horse just, he taught me the visceral sense of trust. And then I started looking at, I don't like making him do something I want to do that he doesn't enjoy doing. And so I chose to have a horse that was willing to do anything I wanted to do and was capable. And I chose not to make him a barrel horse. I just I was like, I would rather have the relationship. I'd rather have the connection. And I don't want to be that aggressive and that pushy. And he was amazing in a lot of ways. He taught me a lot about life. He taught me a lot about connection. He taught me a lot about trust. And so that's kind of my initial exposure to horses is this. They were a place of safe connection and expression. Like I also say it was a place where it was safe enough to feel what I was feeling and toy with what I was feeling because we ride through the felt sense. And yeah, I was very honored to have a horse like that.
Sounds amazing. So you mentioned earlier that you burnt out as a in the C-suite.
Mhm.
What did you do, and what was your like? What did you go to college for? What was your path to the C-suite?
Well, of course, when you use your head to make all of your decisions, you look at horses and you say, oh, I am going to need to make some good money. So
Mm.
I will choose a career that will help me afford horses. Not what I liked, not what I enjoyed doing, but what it would afford me to do. And so I graduated in accounting from Montana State University and worked for the state, worked in public accounting, and I ended up at a multiple location equipment dealership selling farm and ranch equipment. And at 35, I burnt out. And when I say I burnt out, I left there and I slept for a month. Literally, I would sleep 14 to 16 hours a day, and then I would get up and I would lay on the couch all day. And it was really a moment in my life of, okay, what are you going to do? Right. Like it was very hard to go from somebody who could accomplish what I accomplished, achieve what I achieved, to hardly be able to function. And so I started looking around at like what I would like to do. And I bumped into a friend of mine and from college, and he was a physician's assistant. And he said to me, he says, I left my physician's assistant position and got into sales because I knew they would teach me about relationship. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because he looked at his career from a point of developing himself. And like that wasn't in my way of thinking at all. And so a few months later, I ended up in massage school and I became a massage therapist and a body worker. And I started seeing the integration of the brain body connection, of how we store trauma in our body, of how um, the importance of integrating our emotions and our thoughts so they work together. We think logic is the opposite of emotional, and it's not. We need to understand and feel our emotions so we can harness the power of our emotions and then use that to clean up our thinking based, right? Because we can either look at the top down model or the bottom up model. But in my coaching, I talk a lot about if we have an unwanted experience and we can't shift it, it's either stuck in the story we're telling ourselves or it's stuck in our bodies. And so, yeah, I started out working through it on a physical level, understanding even just like different modalities. I've read a lot of shamanism. I worked with a lot of healers, psychics. Um, went to a Bali by myself for 3 weeks and ended up meeting with this healer that he doesn't like. The event I went to was canceled, and so he doesn't work with the general public. And it just happened that it worked out. And
So what was the event you went to? Because
um,
you're skipping over all the really cool stuff right here. This is the stuff I want to
I am
talk
trying
about.
to skip over some, right? Because
Oh,
it's not
hey,
always an easy journey.
well, don't share anything you don't want to share. But if you want to share, what was the event you were going to
Um,
in Bali?
well, I had taught yoga for 8 years, and so I was
Did you
just
skip over the fact you taught yoga for 8 years?
I did skip over that. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm trying
so
to
you taught
move.
yoga for 8 years.
Yes, I did. So it was just this incubator of learning and understanding. Like even with yoga, what I love about yoga is they look at your constitution, like what you're made of. So I'm sort of made of air and fire. And so I can change thoughts really quick. I can really work hard. Like I work like a flare. So I work really hard for a while, but then I need downtime and rest. And as soon as I started recognizing and honoring those patterns in me, my life started getting better. But when I tried to work like 50 hours a week steady, I burn out because it's not in my constitution. So I know the concept of constitution isn't really talked about in American society, but it's really when we start to understand like how we work efficiently, I can come up with a lot of new ideas, but I'm not the person to bring them to fruition. So I have to build a team of people around me instead of trying to do everything. Those are the things I started learning from actually practicing yoga, from getting regular body work. And and even then I was still writing at the time, so I started playing with how do you align yourself not only physically but energetically and emotionally and mentally to another being. And and so that was a whole different exploration of building connection, not only with myself, because I really had to understand what I brought to the table with the horses. And let's face it, like I didn't always bring the things I wanted to bring. There was a lot of perfectionism. And I remember I ended up in EMDR therapy. And um I never have anybody else's experience. So my sessions were 4-hour sessions twice a month for 10 months. So I was doing some very intense work.
Wow.
And but what I started to see was like when I was going through that process and just kind of working through getting rid of my defense mechanisms, my coping skills. It just leaves you in this really raw place. Like, and I would go out to ride and I might be in just this storm inside my head of just thoughts, emotions, past experiences. And I would walk up to catch my horse and I'm like, I'm not riding today. I am not going to beat you up with everything that's going on inside me. And so oftentimes I would just feed them. Sometimes I felt so toxic in my own experience that I would just kind of ground myself. And I was like, you are not going to beat people up with what's rattling around inside you. And, we use horses a lot for therapy, but and I definitely have had the therapeutic presence of horses in my life. But I also think it's important to look at what we bring to the table when we show up with horses, humans, other mammals. Um, and so as I sorted through a lot of the things that were rattling around inside me, like they've completely disappeared. Like people ask me how I got somewhere, and I'm like, oh, all I remember is like the things I took away or the things I learned. But like that whole integration piece, it just kind of dusted everything off and it's a new experience for me. So, um, yeah, that journey was really coming to terms with the things I didn't like about myself.
Mm.
And most of us are taught to not even acknowledge the things we like about ourselves or don't like
Well,
about ourselves.
I was going to say, coming to terms with the things you don't like about yourself, I think the first step to that is actually being aware of the fact that there are things about yourself you don't like. I think, at least for me, all that stuff was below the level of consciousness.
Oh, mine was too for a long time.
You know what I
I
mean?
overcompensated. Yep.
You're not even aware of that stuff, and if you can't find it, um, try ayahuasca. That'll make you stare it in the face.
It's interesting. I know a lot of people who have done ayahuasca, and I always say, well, you hear different experiences, right? Like some people have like a really violent physical reaction of vomiting or, that kind
Uh,
of thing. And
in
I'm
my
like,
experience, almost everybody vomits.
yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to puke. That's what's getting in my way. But yeah, it is really interesting to look at when you really want to heal, you start to pull out all the stops. It became my priority in life of no matter what I do, I am not going to feel like this forever. And it's not that I'm going to avoid it, but I am going to, right, the proverbial eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that really is what I did. I felt when I burned out as a CFO, in horse terms, I look at that as, oh, I hit the end of my lead rope and I had to turn around and look at myself. And oh, I didn't really like everything I saw. And because I was overcompensating for what I didn't want to be. But the flip side is I also wasn't willing to see the things I loved about myself either. And so it's sort of this double whammy. And it is possible to create a different relationship with yourself and still be successful, to still go accomplish things, to still be driven, but driven by things that matter to you.
Yeah, you can't stay in it for the same reason you got in it. I
Hmm.
love what you said a second ago to where you're talking about looking at the things you don't like about yourself, and
Hmm.
then also looking at the things you love about yourself. And it kind of reminded me of, kind of part of the start of my journey was a paragraph in a Brene Brown book
Hmm.
where she said you can't selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower ones, you automatically suppress the higher ones. And it's kind of the same thing. You you can't suppress If you, it's like self-knowledge, if you suppress the things about yourself you don't like, you're also
Hmm.
suppressing the things about yourself that you do like, because
Hmm.
you can't be aware of one without being aware of the other. And I think we just make them.
Right.
And I don't know if it's a decision we make or it's the way society shapes us or conditions us or whatever. But yeah, it sounds very much the same. Whereas you can't selectively suppress emotions, you suppress the lower ones, then you suppress the higher ones.
And what are we encouraged to work on? Our weaknesses. So we're very aware of our weaknesses. And then, right, we got to fix those. We have to change them. We have to make them better. So, just in the language we use around looking at ourselves, we create this division. Oh,
I
I'm
was just
weak here. That's bad. Oh, I'm strong here. That's good. But if you're strong when you need to be soft or soft when you need to be strong, that doesn't work either. So we have to be able to choose when to be strong, when to be soft. And
I
and
think
we
that's
don't
what
talk
something
we don't
horses
talk about
teach
that.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't
Oh,
be the
what a
one
gift they
person.
are.
You can't be the one person all the time. You have to have access
Yeah.
to all the parts of it. Okay, so let's go back to your 3 weeks in Bali, because this sounds pretty fascinating here. What sort of a thing were you going to Bali to do? The one that got cancelled?
Mm, I was going to Bali because I wanted to be somewhere where nobody knew me. I didn't know the language and I could feel who I was separate from any of my conditioning. And so I was going by myself. So I had planned this 8-week yoga retreat just to kind of have a place to land in a foreign country. And I had been there before, but I had only gone solo for 5 days. And this was like the whole trip was solo. And as I was flying across the ocean, I landed in Taiwan and it was like 4 in the morning. And so I waited until like 7 o'clock to get a massage. And I walk out of my massage and my phone just starts blowing up. Mountain Gung is going to erupt, imminent explosion, tsunamis, earthquakes. And I was like, oh, and they're sending us to Bali. So I called my friend who lives in New Zealand and she was able to look up where it was. And where I was going, there wasn't any threat, but the retreat was canceled. So I have like 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes to sort of decide what I'm going to do. And I'm the last one on the plane, like boarding, because I was trying to sort out my fear of I've never flown around the country or flown around the world by myself and going into some places like I don't know. And so basically they said, you can check into Taiwan or you can go to Bali. And I was like, well, I guess I'll go to Bali because I don't have any plans for Taiwan. I got there and I talked to the executive director of the event place where the event was happening. And I talked to the director of the event, the person holding the event. And I decided to keep my plans. So I basically had this intentional community all to myself. I got to pick my villa. I got to have like the black sand beach to myself for a week. And the executive director there was, I told her I wanted to see a healer. And she says, okay, I'll take you to my healer, but it's a 2-hour car ride and you'll come as my guest. And so she says, but I need permission first. And so she took me to um, this healer. And at that time in my life, I was having some prophetic dreams. So there are some dreams coming true that um, when we walked into the villa for the healer, there was a little boy standing on the edge of the porch just peeing in the yard. And I had that dream, like of this little brown boy peeing off a porch. And right then I knew. And I knew like I was meant to be there. And so we went in and he was praying and um, So we sat there for a little bit, and then he invited us into where his altar was, and we're sitting there. And long story short, I had a horse fall with me when I was 22, so I've got some pelvis injury. So I can't do like the yogi sit of lotus pose. And um, so my interpreter tried to correct the way I was sitting, and he was able to say to her, she can't sit like that. And so he saw some things about me, like without even knowing me, without even being able to speak the same language, he told me things about myself that when he told me, I knew. But before he told me, I didn't know. And he told me some things about myself that just, it made things fall into place that righted my whole life of knowing that everything I've been through is contributing to me. Like even the things that I hadn't come to terms with, or the challenges I had experienced, all of a sudden they just kind of, in ways I can hear the sound of like some gears or some bearings kind of falling into where they need to be to make the engine work. Um and so when we were meditating, um I don't share this story a lot, but it shows the power of somebody who has done the level of work to be an authentic healer. We were sitting there, and he was meditating with us, and I literally started vibrating. Like I had to open my eyes to make sure I wasn't bouncing off the floor. And so we're meditating, and I don't know how long it was, but I literally curled up in a ball. Like I was sitting in crisscross applesauce, they call it now. And I literally brought my knees up, and I put my elbows on my knees and hands on my head. And I was just shaking. And I'm just meditating with this guy. And I shouldn't say this guy, I should have a little more respect for him. um,
This guy, I'm picturing the toothless guy from Eat, Pray, Love.
um, except for this guy doesn't work with the public. He only works with people in his village or
Okay.
people,
Okay.
right? So he wasn't like, I didn't have to pay him. I donated. So it's a little different scenario, but yeah. I'll
So,
finish this story
so you're
because
vibrating, yeah.
I do have to describe him because he's really an interesting man. So I'm sitting there curled up and literally shaking. And after we get done meditating, he is slapping his knee and laughing. And he says to my interpreter, "Oh, her body could not handle the power of the Himalayas. She went around the world and she didn't even know it." And and right, I was like, wow, I have never, and it was life changing. Like I don't know what happened there, but I walked out of there completely different, like integrated on a level I have never experienced integration. And then I'll describe him. He's in traditional Balinese dress, and he's got 2 packs of cigarettes. One with cigarettes in it, and he smoked probably 3 or 4 cigarettes there. And the other one, he was hacking phlegm in. he 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 has a cell phone, so his cell phone rings in the middle of our session, and he's like, "Oh, hold on." He takes the call right in the middle of the our session, and right, like, so there's some conflicting worlds here, right? The modern phones and I tend to think that, oh, the people who have really done all their work don't have any of these quote bad habits. We would call them like smoking, and um, they do, right? They're people too. And it was just it's an experience to have somebody tell you things about yourself that don't know you, that don't even speak your language, right? Our culture's not even the same. And yet he was able to see me in a way I had never been seen. And the healing power of being seen. It was amazing.
When you, at one point in time, you said you were vibrating, but then you said you were shaking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you were shaking or vibrating? Like shaking to me kind of gives me the idea of like shivering, whereas vibrating is like a transcended type
I
thing.
think it was both. I think I started out vibrating, right?
Mm,
Because I felt like I was bouncing off the floor. And then, right, I think the shaking probably came from not being able to handle, right? Like not being able to let that level of energy wave through my system. I was still
mm.
blocking and bracing. And um, so probably both, right? There's probably like the spiritual experience of what was going on didn't completely match the ability of my body to process and what was going on.
To allow it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because let's say, right, like with horses, we sometimes we don't dismount by our own free will. and and those patterns of compensating around them become patterns that block the energy flow in our body. So a physical injury can lock something in place just as much as a thought process. And I have had some dismounts that weren't always on my own terms. Not many, but some good ones. And so there definitely were some things in my body that blocked that experience from fully going through my system, my entire system.
Could you sit in the lotus position after that?
No.
No.
No, it is. And ironically at the time, he something about children was brought up, and I don't have any kids, and he basically told me that I would have a hard time having kids. And I'm sitting there on the floor in front of him. He says, "You could not have kids." And I mean, like the injury to my pelvis was when I was younger, but it is interesting to be able to see, like, oh, this person said something to me that now sort of makes sense. Um,
You know, before you said he told you stuff that you intuitively knew about yourself, but you didn't consciously know about yourself. Do you have a name for those experiences? I mean, I do. I just didn't know if you had a little name.
um, one's not coming to me at the moment, but
I call them sixth sense moments from the movie The
oh
Sixth
yeah.
Sense with Bruce Willis. Like
Hmm.
when you realize he's dead, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, hang on, he was dead before.
Yeah.
I kind of, once you realize he's dead, then you're like, hang on.
Hmm.
I think on some level I realized he was dead back then, but I didn't actually know that I knew he was dead back then. Yeah, I just call him.
Yeah.
I had a sixth sense moment. You know,
Something like it's interesting because now that you describe it in that way, what I hear in your speaking, I call those soul points. It's when
soul
we,
points.
right, we
Oh,
actually touch into our soul, and we, right, there's soul recognition with ourselves.
soul
And that's
points is
just
some.
I make up my own language. So
Yeah, that yeah, that
yeah,
sounds
it
better than sixth
really,
sense moment. But yeah,
yeah, it really are those times where you know, and you don't have to explain it. It's just, and it changes the direction of your life. It's a soul point.
mm. You know, I sometimes have it giving clinics. So it's not so much. me stuff, but doing things with the horse. And when I'm doing a clinic, I'm explaining to everybody what I'm doing as I'm doing it,
Hmm.
And sometimes I will explain something in a way I'm like where I get a deeper understanding of what's going on there, and I'm like, at some point I knew that, but I didn't know I knew that.
Hmm. Yeah, I can tell by the expression on your face of just that it's sort of like awestruck
Mm,
in the clarity of the moment.
mm.
And those little things alter the way you show up next time, right? Like, to me, that's how our life unfolds, one step at a time. Because now that you know it, have this wisdom, and you've integrated it, you're going to show up differently with the next horse, or maybe even change the way you show up with the horse in front of you in the moment.
Yes. You were talking about your 8 years of yoga before,
Mm-hmm.
but then you said about understanding your composition, basically, like in that Ayurvedic
Mm-hmm.
sense. Is what
Right.
what sort of yoga did you study?
Just hatha yoga.
Hmm.
And then, like anything I do, um, I brought a lot of horse training techniques to my yoga. and, and I also bring a lot of horse training techniques to my coaching. But I
It's just
also,
nature, isn't it?
right, one of the things that I've heard growing up and riding horses a lot is you can't teach feel. And I absolutely think you can. But as a trainer, you have to be willing to feel what you feel so you can teach people how to feel. And that is, I think, where what we miss. We make riding mechanical. We take working out and moving our bodies and turn it into fitness and exercise. And when I was teaching yoga, it was all about, here's how you find the alignment of a neutral pelvis. Here's how you understand the curves of your spine. So when you straighten your spine, you're not actually taking the curves out. You're supporting the musculature to keep the natural curves of your spine, which then allows the movement of the horse to wave through naturally. The way you breathe affects the tension of the muscles around your spine. Just like the tension in the muscles around your spine affect your breathing. So you can influence the fluidity of your spine through the way you breathe. And you can also stiffen your spine by the way you breathe. And it's just starting with the breath, and then be willing to feel what you feel. Be willing to, what one of the things at the end of a yoga practice, you do savasana, where you actually lay down and integrate. And that is the most important part of the practice, is the integration. And so when I would bring people back, I would always talk about, wait for your body to give you the cue. Don't just start moving. Feel if it waves from the inside out, or if, and it turns into like this full body stretch and a deep breath. Notice if you curl up in a ball, right? That you really want to be smaller and turn inward. And start to honor this process that's being expressed in you. Pay attention to how, like when you're in a stretch, if you just kind of don't feel comfortable in it, don't practice being uncomfortable, because our society already teaches us and encourages us to be uncomfortable and then endure it. So, but it's really about taking people to a place where they can even experience themselves, and then make a choice on what they feel from the inside out. And then, right, like it just applies to riding. Like if you can feel your seat bones when you're riding, if you know how to find a neutral pelvis when you're riding, when you can feel the flexibility of your spine, you start to become a better rider because of the awareness you're creating.
I love what you said a minute ago when you said feel from the inside out.
Hmm.
There's a
We are
there's a book
driven from the inside out.
there's a book I've got called Radical Wholeness, and it talks
Mm.
about a tribe, a West African tribe called the Anglo-Ewe, and they don't think we have five senses. They think we have 9 or 11 or something like that.
Hmm.
But one of the
Yeah.
senses is called sesesalame, which is literally translates into English as feel flesh from the inside out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting you said, people say you can't teach feel,
Hmm.
and that's quite a bit of old dogma and especially in
Hmm.
the quote unquote horsemanship,
Yes.
um, the horsemanship sphere, and I think it comes from the same, and this isn't, I'm not disregarding these people, but it comes from the same horsemanship, so to speak, as the same guys used to say, you're not working on the horse, you're working on yourself. But
Hmm.
then offer no suggestions
Yes. I know.
on how to work on yourself.
Yeah.
You know, uh, it was, to me, that is almost like just pointing the finger at you saying, you're the problem.
Yeah.
You're an idiot. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Uh, like, and I even think those guys didn't work on themselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. And
Um,
I would even say, right, like one of the things that talk about is we don't work on ourselves. The self improvement mindset is a hamster wheel. It
I was
keeps
going to
the
ask you about that.
you're not enough in place. But when you're willing to connect and to care for and to get your needs met, you create a relationship that's more dynamic, that develops and fosters understanding and growth. And you can go, oh, this is new today. I haven't had this experience. Oh, you know what? I finally set that boundary and I felt really good about setting it. Oh, I asked for what I need and I got exactly what I needed, and that felt good. Or I went to ask for what I needed and it was really wonky. So this time I think I'm going to try to approach them this way. I'm going to have more clarity around what I need, which is way different than the mindset of working on yourself or being caught up in the hamster wheel of self improvement. It's understanding the nature of things and managing the indicators of what you want to create.
On your website, that's what I was going to ask you about. So on your website, it says here, at 35, I burned out in a CFO position. I was lost. I had splintered myself into everything other people in society thought I should be. I had lost
Hmm.
my self connection and got caught in the hamster wheel of self improvement. Now, can
Hmm.
you unravel that a little bit? Because I think there's the time in your life where you are pretty self unaware,
Hmm.
and then you go, okay, I want to make some changes. Can you talk about the hamster wheel of self improvement? Like
Yeah.
what things do you think are quite common out there in the self improvement space that is suggested a lot that you feel is actually just hamster wheeling?
Mm. Oh, well, I haven't ever described it like this, but you could look at my life in two different ways. Like there was a time period where I was very high functioning and very shut down and cut off with very little self connection, very reactive. I could tell you exactly what I thought like that. Um, I even had some addictions to being perfect, to being right. When I was in accounting, I always proved everything out two different ways because if I was ever questioned, I wanted to know I was right. But underneath that, what it was hiding is I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to make a mistake. If I screwed up, if I asked for help, I must be a failure. I must be unqualified for this position. So the self improvement was having to prove it out two ways to even think I
Okay,
was
okay, okay,
right.
okay.
Um, and I've always been curious about the human condition. So I've been reading self-help books. And I thought if I learned to communicate the right way, I wouldn't have any rubs with people in life. And that's just not true. And so I was working on fixing the way I communicated, understanding how to set boundaries, understanding why people do what they do. Like, even when I was working at the equipment dealership, one of the things I did is I was working primarily with men. So I was reading all these books on trying to understand men. And of course, none of them were reading books on how to understand a woman. Right? And so I was exerting all this effort to understand because, right, like if it didn't go the way I wanted it to or had intended it to, either I didn't work hard enough, I didn't try hard enough, I didn't put in enough effort, or I was a failure. Right, like there was no degree of having grace, of having compassion, of really even acknowledging my accomplishments. And even when I was a CPA and a CFO, I used to say, oh, monkeys could do this. Absolutely no awareness of what I had accomplished, what it took to get there. And it was just, I just became consumed by growing, of reading, of, and there was no integration. There was really no way to look at a situation and say, oh, it doesn't matter how you participate here. It's not going to change based on how you participate. So now the choice becomes, do you want to participate here or not? But I was trying to fix it. I was trying to, oh, I just need to learn to say it this way. Oh, I just need to read this book on fierce conversations, how to have those direct, clear conversations. Um, yeah, it's it's always fixing what's wrong, and what it's really covering up is I'm not enough. That was my experience, right? Like other people might have their own experience, and I believe they do. But so that was the hamster wheel of, oh, I just have to do something to make this right. It couldn't be in the environment. It couldn't be that somebody else was unwilling to hear or misconstrued what I had to say. I took 100% of the responsibility for how things went in my life, even beyond what I could control in my life. And so, in that gap from what I could control and what I couldn't control, I tried to fix. And that's the hamster wheel.
Mm. I like that. Yeah, I like that no integration thing. That kind of resonates with me a little bit. Um, so you did the yoga for quite a while.
Mhm.
The massage stuff, was that before the yoga?
No, it came before. So I was a massage therapist for 14 years and taught yoga for 8. And then, COVID kind of threw a curveball in everybody's life. So we'll just say COVID happened.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask. So now you are basically a life coach. How long have you
Mhm.
been doing that?
3 years.
Okay.
Well, uh, I've been doing it my whole life,
Right.
but now I just realize I don't give unsolicited coaching anymore.
Uh, so before the I'm now a life coach,
Mhm.
what were you doing? What was the thing before you transitioned into that?
I was teaching yoga and doing
Okay.
massage to make my living, yes.
Okay. And did you, because I think the life coach thing is more of a calling than a it's my occupation. This is what I'm going to do to make money so that I
Mhm.
can live and have a roof over my head. What was the transition how was the transition from teaching yoga and doing the massage to this? Did you like just stop and go, I'm a life coach and I'm prepared to starve while I built up my
No.
business? Or did you start doing the life coaching and the other at the same time?
Um, well, I think I was doing a lot of coaching in my sessions, in my
Mm,
massage sessions,
yeah, yeah.
because I was always trying to build the brain body connection. So I remember there's a lot to unpack it in this example, but I remember this woman came in and I was in this quiet, calm space, and she walked in and it felt like the room heated up. And I was like, whew. And, she comes in and we're talking about why she's there. And, she's got some low back pain. And, okay. And I kept like looking around, like, is the heater on? Like, what's all of this? Just, I can't even really explain what I was feeling. And finally I looked at her and I said, are you mad about something? And she's like, no. And about 15 minutes later, she about sits up off the table. I am mad. And you know what I'm mad about? Then she told me. But I was like, oh, phew. Like, I have been feeling all this anxiety and tension and heat, and I couldn't understand, right? Like, she was the only new thing that came into my environment. But I had the awareness of what was going on with me to actually feel how her presence changed my internal experience. And it was starting to see like, oh, if I could start tuning people into their emotions while they're working in their body releases. When their
Mm.
brain can accurately interpret what it's sensing in the body, it can rest. But if we never make that connection to the brain and the body, in one of the videos I watched of yours recently, you were talking about separation anxiety, where the body's here and the brain is someplace else. We have that a lot in humans. So that's sort of where I started honing my skills and like reading books on yoga and acupuncture and chakras and different healing systems. And I just call them the sacred sciences. About really, they are. It's
Mm.
how we create wholeness. And so it sort of developed in the teaching. And then um, a friend of mine called and she was talking about something, and I said, have you ever thought of hiring me to be your coach? And her response was, yes, God, yes, I've been waiting for you to ask. And literally that's how it started, and I've had paying clients ever since. um, but it is really about teaching and guiding people to wholeness.
When you said that when that lady came in the room, the room felt hot. Do you
Hmm.
think that well, how am I going to pose this question? Do you think that is something everybody has the ability to do, or do you think you might be a bit of an empath?
I'm definitely an empath,
Okay, right.
but but as as human beings, we have all human qualities. We have all human abilities, and we forget that. So I think people can develop, right? Maybe not to the same volume or degree,
Right. Okay.
but everybody has access to that. And I think more people have access to it. We just don't have a language to talk about it in our society.
Whereas the West African tribe has a word for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book was so cool because it kind of goes along with everything else I've been reading. Is that's our natural state. We
Yeah.
all, I've had animal communicators on the podcast who've, I
Mm-hmm.
ask them, I asked him, when did you know you could do that? And I think, oh, that was my first language. And
Yeah.
they now teach people to do it. And they said, I'm not teaching them anything. I'm just helping them remember.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so circling back to the hamster wheel a little bit of self improvement, when you think about, when I think about the hamster wheel of self improvement, I'm thinking about we're always trying to gain a skill. It's skill building. But when we're talking about self connection, we're cultivating and developing our true gifts and talents. It's coming back home to ourselves. It's participating from our natural level of participation, which is good enough for success. But what we do is we point to the person who does something that's, like, I'll even say supernatural, right? That, like, Michael Jordan had a supernatural talent, or maybe I should update it to 2022. Stephen Curry has a supernatural ability for the game of basketball. That is his natural talent. Now, if you put me through the same skills training as him, I'm only 5 foot. So I am not going to be able to play at his level. Not because you, not because I don't have the same training or the ability to develop the skill, but I don't have the same talent as he does. And we forget to acknowledge that we don't all have the same talent, so we can't expect to be like these outlying supernatural people. We have to own and claim our own talents, our own gifts. And we all have something to contribute.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody's special, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, the thing about like this podcast, having these conversations, like, I think I could do a podcast with anybody.
I think you could.
I'm not saying I could do a podcast with anybody. Anybody could do a podcast with anybody because everybody has got a story that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Everybody. And yeah.
Yeah. It is really great to have like things like podcasts now, right? When we were just talking with some friends last night, and how, growing up, there was 2 radio stations in town, 3, sometimes if you listen to FM. AM, Paul Harvey was always on the radio. and and right, how it united us in ways, but then the offering of podcasts like expands our ability to get different ideas, to have a different way of thinking, to explore new thoughts, to see how much we're all alike as human beings. And when we look for our similarities, for our human capacity, the need to compete and be stuck in survival sort of fades away. You can just have a natural conversation and take something away from it. And you contribute to me, and I contribute to you. And that's like a really great natural exchange of energy.
I was just, when you said something about, you give something to me, I give something to you. And I was just thinking, I was talking to, I was at a horse expo in LA a number of years ago. And do you know Jonathan Field from Canada?
I don't.
Amazing horseman, amazing human being, actually. But we were sitting there having a drink in the bar or in the restaurant of the hotel after the horse expo.
Mhm.
And Jonathan was talking about energy. And he just said, and like this is an exchange of energy, this conversation. He just
Yes, it
moved
is.
his hand back and forth between us two. And when you were saying that thing you were saying a minute ago, I was thinking, this is like Jonathan's conversation.
Yeah.
It's an exchange of energy. And the next words out of your mouth were, it's an exchange of energy. Yeah. So cool.
Right? It just shows the level of connection.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, you said, then COVID happened, and COVID was
Hmm.
kind of what got you doing the or allowed you to probably pursue this because you
Hmm.
can do this virtually. It's not a hands-on thing. So how did you you started out with that one friend, but then how did you start to grow the business from there? Because it's an interesting
Well,
field to be in. Your life
right,
experience qualifies you. It's not your CV that qualifies you.
right. Um, well, I laugh. I always say marketing is like a black hole to me. I can't figure it out because nobody has ever come to me through marketing. It's all been literally people, like, I'll share what they do and or share what I do, and they say, like, my most recent client, just they're a referred person, and I knew them previously from like 10, 12 years ago. So it's not the first point of contact, but literally they called me up and bought a coaching package.
Mm.
So they've just come very organically. A lot of people rehire me. I've got a couple clients that have worked with me for a couple years now, and just the thing that I get out of it is when they acknowledge their own growth and feel good about their own growth. There is something that is contagious about that. It's beyond, it's not even cheerleading them. It's like witnessing those soul points in their life that they're having with themselves. It is something that fuels me like nothing else. And and so it's just growing very organically, very slowly. Um, and and I always, one of the things I say initially too is, if you are truly on a trajectory of healing and self connection, I hope at some point you outgrow me. Like, I want our relationship to change from coach to coach and coachee to something beyond, where you are not needing me for coaching, that you learn to start to eventually coach yourself. So I'm really clear in, I don't want to create codependent relationships with my clients. And so I have clients that will work with me for like a 10 session package, and then they'll take a couple months off and they're saying, "Oh, now I'm seeing this. Could you help me through that?"
Mm.
And then they'll come back and say, "Oh, I'm growing in my career and I'm bumping up against some patterns of relating that are getting in my way of meeting my goals." And then they'll rehire me. And so it's right now, it's just like this beautiful, organic, small collective of people. And then also, right, I'm ready to open my doors for more clients. Um, but I want them to be organic. I want them to be authentic and real, and really to choose this because they're choosing it for themselves. Um, so I think with any coaching business, it swings. You, especially initially, like, you'll be really, really busy, and then you might dribble down to a client or two, and then you'll get three in 2 weeks, and then they might all work together and complete at the same time, and then the next batch comes in, and it's learning to be with the rhythm of the business and not judge it on a linear or projected level,
Right.
because nothing in nature grows all the time. It cycles.
Nothing in nature grows all the time. I love that. I was in the grocery store yesterday and I was in the vegetable section, and something came to me that I've heard before, that we eat all wrong because
Mhm.
we eat things that are available all year round, and we didn't evolve to, we evolved to eat certain things in the winter and certain things in the summer, and you don't have
Right?
fresh strawberries all the time. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like what you're just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Nature doesn't grow all the time.
Yeah. Well, what does green grass do in the winter for or in the spring for horses? It's a natural warming process.
Mm. I was wondering where you were going with that. Sorry.
Yeah. Right. It's recognizing that they cycle. Like there's a natural process for us to thrive, not just survive, but there is a natural process inherent to thrive. And it comes back to, are you paying attention to what you eat? Right now, I'm working with a naturopath health coach to help me look at some of the things I'm eating. And, I tend to like coffee in the morning and only eat a couple meals a day. And and really like looking at, is that the best for me? It might be, but only to the level I currently want to accomplish, right? If I want my life to stay the same, then I can continue eating the same. But if I'm right, just like in performance horses, if we want to take them up to the next level of performance, we need to be more conscientious about what we're feeding them. And also the way we rest them, the way we connect with them. Because the higher level of performance, ideally, the better connection you would have, not the more compliance. But
Yeah,
it's all integrated.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother podcast in itself, that one. But you know what I should do? I probably should get to your question. Seeing you now, you're drinking your coffee.
I know. I did have breakfast before I had coffee, though.
Okay. So I'm going to go through these questions that you selected, and the first one was, if you could spread a message throughout the world, what would it be? Or your favorite quote? Or you can give me an and or. I think I know what your favorite quote is already.
Well, right, like that one really is hot in the moment, and I think it's important to speak to what's here instead of what we think we should say. So now that you ask me this question, I'm really hearing two things to say. Is we underestimate the power of the connection with ourselves and the importance of downtime and integration. That as we understand ourselves, we actually gain an access to understanding other human beings after we clean up all of our projections. But when we can start to see, oh, when I'm scared, I do this wonky thing and it's almost beyond my control. And so when we see somebody doing a wonky thing, we could maybe look to, are they scared or are they just doing this wonky thing? It gives us an access, this relationship with our own humanity and our own spiritual growth and our own path can really be the place where we cultivate grace for another human being or another living being.
Another sentient being. Yeah, that's the thing I have
Mm-hmm.
found is that, looking into trauma, especially like, say, Gabor Mate stuff and things like that, is you start to realize, it's like the coping privilege I was talking about. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you start to realize that most people's stuff is just a result of trauma and it's not a choice. And you
Mm-hmm.
start to have a lot of grace around around that.
Mm-hmm.
I've become a lot less judgmental about people,
Yeah.
um, because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my mentors said, you're getting somewhere when you start to say, oh, and this too. This is a part of myself I haven't come to terms with yet. This is a part of myself I haven't learned to love yet. Oh, I can include this too. Oh, this time when I go on a rant and I energetically run over the top of somebody with my opinion. And oh, I have to, yep, include this too. Like, that's who I am too. This too is when we really start to own and create our wholeness. And then we get to choose. But if we deny it and push it away, we can't see it clearly enough to do anything about it.
Well, that's kind of like emotions. Very early on in this conversation, she said something about that. And, my wife suffers from anxiety. And for a
Mm-hmm.
long time, the goal was to develop techniques to damper the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next level is to be able to sit with it
Right.
and say, where is this emotion coming from? Rather than trying
Mm-hmm.
to stop the emotion from happening,
Mm-hmm.
but to sit with the emotion and be in the moment and let it wash over you and really consider where's it coming from. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
progression of the whole thing. Okay, next question. So what's the most worthwhile thing and you've probably covered this, but what's the most worthwhile thing you've
Mm-hmm.
done, something that has changed the course of your life?
Well, really, burning out was a gift to me. It launched me into this whole trajectory of something more aligned with who I am, like what I deeply care about, what I'm committed to bringing to the people in my life. And it's really just understanding who we are and living from the truth of who we are without twisting ourselves or another person into some kind of an arrangement we would call a relationship. Or, right, sometimes it shows up in our horses of, right, I had this experience of, I wanted to be a barrel racer and you're my horse, so you're going to be a barrel racing horse, whether you like it or not. And right, like when I look back at that, I was like, wow, I was really running over the top of this horse that was an absolute gift to me. And I say, I might have trained him, but he broke me. And that horse really was the impetus of helping me look at myself. So
It was a soul
that,
point.
yeah, being willing, just even even willing to look at what I don't want to look at has made all the difference. Yeah.
Wow. Next question. What quality do you admire in others?
Well, this one I'm going to take on a tangent because it circles back to, as human beings, we have all human qualities. And so when we have admiration, we put somebody on a pedestal, whether they want to be there or not. So we create this power differential. And I tend to not admire people. I tend to look at them and say, oh, they're demonstrating this quality that I'm trying to cultivate in myself. How can I be inspired by them? How did they demonstrate it in a way that could work for me? Versus, and this isn't always true, but I see it a lot in some of the people I have coached, is where they put somebody up on a place where they admire and they're great and they're good and I'm bad. They're great and I'm nothing. And so I try not to have that. If I'll put it this way, if I'm admiring something about somebody, it's pointing to something I haven't seen in me or I haven't cultivated in me. And so I turn admiration into inspiration.
Wow. I think that could be the single best answer to a question I've asked anybody on the podcast.
Wow. Thank you.
That was very cool. I was just writing it down. I was writing a note down here for my son Tyler. Hey, you got to get this bit. This bit is so cool.
Right.
Wow.
Right. But it also gives me access to not having to compete with others. That maybe there's a point of being inspired by somebody and them being a source of fuel, or right, of motivation, of like there could be a positive energetic connection from something we admire. I just don't want to get too hung up on levels, because I think we all have a gift to contribute.
Yeah, I like doing clinics and stuff. I'll have people, or maybe at a horse expo, and people come up to the booth and they admire
Mhm.
me, and you get talking to them, and I'm thinking, I couldn't do what you do. You're amazing. You're amazing.
Yeah,
Whatever you do in life is like, oh my, I just do some
yeah,
stuff with horses, but you're a badass. It's just yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so the next question, the number one question on the podcast, everybody chooses this question. What is your relationship like with fear?
I love fear. Right. Because fear is an energizing emotion, right? It is meant to inspire us into action. So there's like legit fear, like um, you're way back in the mountains and you just had a horse wreck and you should really be scared in this instance, because it's calling you to action. It's calling you to respond. But what happens is most of us are stuck in a place where we are just I deal with default emotions a lot. So we default to fear. And then we kind of keep this sense of aliveness alive from being scared of this and being scared of that. And it's not really a fear, it's an imagined fear. And so when we really look at the power of our emotions, when we refine fear, it transforms into a powerful intuition. So if I'm not willing to look at fear, embrace fear, and even sometimes merge with fear to take the action that's needed, I might just be reactive. But when I can harness the power of fear, it becomes what guides my sense of intuition. So when I'm scared of something, I always look at, like, is this real or imagined? Am I the other way of looking at it is it safe and comfortable? Is it unsafe and uncomfortable? And this ties into horses, right? Horses really are or can be dangerous animals. There can be a lot of reasons to feel unsafe and uncomfortable. But when we learn some things about horses, we can start to create a safe environment where we can do uncomfortable things. Or we can create a sense of comfort, like we know and understand ourselves of how we will react, what the actions we will take. We create this sense of comfort in doing something that's unsafe in a chosen moment. Like, for example, if you got a horse upside down in the trail in the mountains, that's not a very good situation to be in, right? Or if they've tumbled down a rock slide and they're stuck in a rock pile, how are you going to get this horse out? It's unsafe and it's uncomfortable, but you still have to take action because you can't leave the horse there. There's fear, and it's recognizing, okay, I've got some past experience. I know how this horse responds. I know how I respond. And you're choosing to work with the fear. And so it really kind of becomes that whisper in your mind of, hey, don't ask too hard because you don't want this horse to jump and break a leg, but you need to apply a little pressure so they can maybe pick a leg out of that rock puzzle and get back on the trail.
I just love your example. Obviously, you live in Montana and you've been to some crazy places, because you just 2 times there you just threw out examples of horse things that, like, I don't know anybody who's ever had that wreck, but obviously you have.
Yeah, I've been close to some good ones. Right. And you all learn a lot from being in places that are unsafe and uncomfortable. But there's also the choosing wisely. One thing my dad used to say, and I laugh because I think a lot of horsemen are actually very intuitive, but they won't speak about intuition. But my dad would say, if you reach down for that back cinch, and you might think, this horse could kick me if I'm not careful, and you don't listen to that, and they kick you, you earned that. But if you listen to that wisdom, you might fish that back cinch over with your lead rope
Or your foot.
and get it, right? But it's that intuition that arises out of fear. When we refine it, fear becomes intuition.
Another wow. That's very, very, very cool. And you've got, oh, yes, one more question here. What does it mean to you to be a leader or a follower? What are your thoughts on leadership and followership?
I think we're all leaders and we're all followers. And really, yeah, in healthy relationships, no, let me say this differently. I was at an event and the speaker at the event said this: when we attach for 3 reasons: either to connect, to control, or to be controlled. So we could look at the leader as being the person who is willing to take control, and the followers as being the people who are willing to follow, that are willing to be controlled. But in healthy relationship, we're looking for true connection. So that means sometimes I'm the leader and sometimes the horse is the leader, or the other sentient being is the leader. And I think the true people that refine leadership actually give away power and actually are led by others. And then we are esteemed to a position of leader because people can count on us and trust what we bring and contribute to the table. It's not a position.
It's almost a dance. At a horse expo recently, I had a lady come up to the booth who used to be a professional ballroom dancer, and she said, talking about leadership and followership, and she said, so in ballroom dancing, the leader leads, but they also have to be able to follow the follow.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, yeah, it's
That
all
is
the
brilliant.
it's all the parts. It's not one thing. A number of years ago, I went to a one-day Wim Hof seminar where it's where I started doing the ice baths. And one of the exercises they had us do, we broke off into pairs, and they gave each pair a toothpick, and they had you stand facing each other and extend your index finger on your right hand and put the toothpick in between the fingers. And they
Yeah.
said, now one of you is going to be the leader and the other one's going to be the follower. And the leader moves their hand around, and the idea is not to poke a hole in anybody and not let the toothpick drop. And so one person's a leader, one person's a follower. You do that for a bit. And then he said, now I want you to change, and the other person's lead and follow. And then once you do that, Then what I want you to do is freestyle. And so
Mm.
someone might take over the leadership and the other one follows, but then the follower might take over, and then the follower turns into the leader, and then the leader turns into a follower. And what was really interesting is we have, I mean, you guys listening can't see now, but I've got my hand like held up with my fingers
Mhm.
spread flat. That's how we're doing it. So the toothpick was in between our index fingers. But towards the end of it, he said, I want you to do something right now. Take your spare hand and stick it in between the two hands. And there was like an energy field in there. Like as you put your hand in there, you could
Mhm.
feel the energy in between those two hands, because, energy goes where your focus goes. And because I think when one person's leading, the other one's following, there's a
Mhm.
certain kind of focus. You've only got
Right.
one job to do. And but when it was the freestyle thing and you're really, really present there and you're feeling for an opportunity maybe to take over you feel where they start to become passive and go, I'm ready to be led
Mhm.
right now. And the places you can take over that. And,
Right.
you're not looking for an opportunity to exert your will. You are looking for the place where they go, okay, I want to hand over the leadership role to you. And it's almost like working with
Right.
horses, like horses, it's
Yes.
all give and take. It's like you've got to feel where they allow you to lead, and then you feel where they go, no, I need to be in control
Mhm.
right now, and you can give that up. And it's that subtle
Yeah.
subtle dance, but it's a great exercise.
I remember I was riding my horse, and this horse, the first time I ever asked him to do a flying lead change, he did a flying lead change both ways. And I mean, this horse, I remember getting off him and going, if people had the same expectations of me that I do of you, I would be coming apart. Like I would be telling you where to go, right? I just would not tolerate that level of expectation. And you do it willingly. And so one day I'm out riding him and I asked him for a left lead and he kicked up at my spur. And of course, like that little reprimand, don't put up with that bad behavior, kicked in. And I got that little intuition that said, he's asking you to be a better human. And I was like, damn it. So the next time, I kind of rode around, cleared my mind, and came back and tried again. And I asked softer. And he just popped out in to this beautiful lead departure. And right, like we forget about he was leading me in that moment. Even though, quote, I was the leader in a lot of the how we speak about that. But it was him asking me, "Would you ask a little nicer?" "Oh, when you ask a little nicer, I'll give this to you willingly." Oh, right? Like those are the things of looking at yourself that we don't spend a lot of time looking at ourselves.
Right.
But horses, we say that horses can read fear, they can tell, and I'm like, no. I mean, yes, I don't want to discount what other people interpret, but what I think is horses read energy. They read when we're not congruent inside. So
Almost
if
certainly.
you're right, and it's an energetic feel. And what's interesting is we do this with each other all the time, but we don't acknowledge it. Like you've sat down next to somebody and been like, kind of leaned away and went, whoa, I don't know that I want to engage in a conversation with them. Maybe this isn't all conscious, but or you turned your back. And it's because we're reading the energy between two things.
Yeah, that Jonathan Field I talked about before, he's got one of the coolest vibes of anybody I've been around. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can
Yeah.
feel that guy's energy. Um, yeah, great answers to great questions. This has been such a fun conversation. You
Well,
know,
I'm so grateful you took a chance not knowing anything about me when I got your email and I responded and I was like, "Oh, he's not even going to screen me to see if I'm qualified for the podcast." So I really appreciate this time with you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, I don't know if we said it at the start, but I didn't know anything about Julie, and Julie's friend Alison messaged me and sent me an email and said, "You really should have Julie on the podcast." And I had a little look at your little bio on your website. I'm like, sounds perfect to me. And of course, it was perfect. So thank you so much. So, where can people find out more about Julie?
You can go to my website, julieripley.com, and just reach me through the contact form there. And yeah, and there's a self-assessment on, or there's an assessment on self-connection there. If you want to take that assessment, that'll get you on my email list as well.
I did take the test 2 days ago.
Oh, you did? All
Mm.
right. Good.
Good
Any
question.
any any share on how you scored?
I was right in the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've done some work. I've got some work left to do.
We all do. The journey of a soul takes a lifetime.
Yes, it sure does. Wow. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. There was some of that stuff there. Some of that stuff there just blew me away. So it's been fun. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Warwick. Have a great day.
You too, and you guys at home listening. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Journey On podcast.